Hello everyone, my name is Andre. I play NL 500 and NL 1000 limit games, and my hourly rate is $175 per hour. Today we're going to analyze the database of players at no limit 1000 plus 6 max tables, just as I wanted, and even here people make mistakes. I'll be using a special HUD in yellow. Solver values are shown. Blue, red, and white represent the player's values. White represents an average appropriate value, meaning it's close to the solver's value. Blue is overestimated and red is underestimated. And let's probably take a look at situations closer to the river. That is, I have two tabs here, two bet pots, meaning single raised pots in position and out of position. And here, why exactly this line, I want to focus on the river, because it's on the river where most people make the majority of their mistakes, and as a result this leads to an imbalance, a situation where we can actively bluff with raises, bets, and so on in this manner. This happens firstly because opponents very often underbluff, and we can actively fold to 3 barrels. For example, bet, 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 we see here that the value is inflated, 50% higher than the solver, but I think there still won't be enough bluffs here. According to the sizings, there should be an increase in bluffs, but there aren't any here. So if we have, say, 3 barrels and the person is in position, we can calmly fold the majority of our combinations. Of course, this is a general sample over 42 million hands, but as a base, as a foundation to build from, it's quite suitable. Let's look at the next line. Bet, check, bet. Here, opponents don't call enough and very often check the river. Looking at the check, we can see that the total check wins 3.5 blinds, and the weaker part of the range wins 6 blinds, which is generally not bad, but with a bet, our total win rate is 7 blinds. So it's clear that the range here seems to be stronger. There are some situations, let's even look at the check, some situations where the opponent could, in general, make a bet, but doesn't do so. For example, here's the very first hand. We have pocket nines. The opponent played. Let's actually open the replayer and remove it. So the opponent on the button plays, puts in a standard flop bet with nines, and by the way, even at these limits, people still use small bet sizes. Not even still, but generally they use small bet sizes. This is because even at these limits, people don't check raise enough to put up resistance. It goes check check, and on the river a 5 comes. In fact, we have a value bet against 8s, 7s, maybe even some ace-x hands might call us. So if we bet here, we can actually value bet something else as well, but with check-check, we're not winning more than we could have. There are actually a lot of such situations, and it's worth looking for them. A small increase in win rate will come from this specific situation, this specific line, but it can be significant if it's used everywhere. That is, we can even increase our win rate by half a blind there, and that's already excellent. Next, we have the line check, bet, bet. Here we see that overall the opponent has solver approved values. And here's the most interesting line, 2 checks and a bet on the river. That is, when the opponent is in position, that is, the player is in position, and accordingly, once again, they don't bet enough. That is, if there's a check on the turn in any situation, then the river bet will be insufficient. That is, people don't value bet enough, but at the same time they fold very well. That is, they fold easily to all sizings, here they fold, and here they fold as well. In fact, the higher the sizing, the more often we see folds. I think there's a large enough sample here to draw this conclusion. So overall, that's okay. And the last line. Here we have a situation of check, call, bet. That is, for example, on the big blind. If we're sitting there, we've bet the turn and then played check on the river. And again, there's a big deviation from the solver here, 10%. They also don't bluff often enough. And if you look at the check range, you can see that there will always be a lot of medium and weak hands in the check. And if you take the medium hands, again, there are situations where you can value bet. Well, here, for example, you made a standard bet on the turn and then checked. Ace-10 can be value bet easily, and Ace-7 can also be value bet on a paired board. That is, when an overbet is made on the turn, it will always be a polarized range, and against a polarized range, I think you can find a value bet. The opponent made a big bet and then checked the river. Well, it's unlikely there will ever be a check with strong hands here. Again, this is because people tend to underbet, meaning there aren't enough bets on the river to play value check raise. So this leads me to my next conclusion. Opponents should seize the initiative when out of position. That is, when we are out of position, we should seize the initiative with our strong hands and essentially apply pressure with donk bets. If we look again here, we have the bet check fold line. Looking at the bet sizes, you can see that there will be overfolding to medium-sized bets. That is 30% and 70% of the pot. These are standard, very common bet sizes, and it is precisely against these bets that there will be a significant deviation. For example, at 30% of the pot, which could be 25, 20, 33, or 40%, so here the bet goes up to half the pot, and there is about a 14% difference. If the bet is 70%, that is 2.3 or 2.4 times the pot, then the difference is already 10%. So when the opponent bets the flop, we can often float again. I mentioned this as well during the preliminary database review. This also works in 6 max games. There's also the check-check fold line. Here too there will be overfolding. This is because opponents don't double barrel enough. On the turn and flop, they actually overbet, but on the turn they don't bet enough. And if they play check on the flop, then there definitely should be a bet on the turn. And here we can probably, well, yes, overall it seems like they do bet the turn here. But actually, no, now there are 2 bet pots positions. Check bet, I'm interested in the line. Okay, let's see now. This is bet flop. Well, there isn't such a line here. Here it is, check bet. So overall, of course, the values are close to solver values. Check call for different bet sizes. This is also on the turn. The values seem to align quite well with each other, but for some reason, the range remains considerably and noticeably weak by the river. This overall gives us the distinct advantage of applying pressure, so to speak, even when we are out of position as the caller. That is to say, we can also put a significant amount of pressure on our opponent. For example, when we have a hand from the bluff catcher category, we can easily play a check raise. So if we decide to check, we should never rule out the check raise. It is a very profitable line and will definitely be a highly positive expected value play in the long run. And now let's take a look at the overall lines. So when the aggressor bets 3 barrels, that's already an inflated frequency, not so much the size, but the frequency, because it's mostly for value. When the betting goes bet, check, bet, that's close to solver strategy, and specifically here, it's shown as close to solver. Check, bet, bet is also close to solver strategy, with only a slight deviation, as well as 2 checks and a bet. Here, there is no more betting, because the entire middle range, that is low pairs and mid pairs, very often goes into check. Moreover, low pairs often have to be turned into bluffs because we can't win with them quite often. And we also need to turn them into bluffs with some frequency. Next, we again have the line called check bet. This is already a play against a donk bet. We all understand that. Yes. All tech beta. Here too, there isn't enough aggression. In other words, every time the opponent faces some kind of aggression that's unclear to him, he gets confused. This applies to situations when we bet on the turn and to situations when we donk bet on the flop. We donk bet on the flop with some frequency, on suitable board textures and so on. And donk bets on the turn, that is after a missed continuation bet, we can actually put in quite a bit, even against some bloggers. In general, it works. And here again we have a situation with an unclear line, call bet. That is, when the opponent plays call and 2 donk bets and then bets the river, it's usually with a pretty strong range. But here the sample size is very small. This is a very rare line. If you look at the overall picture regarding folds, I would probably pay attention to the sizings after the first and second bets. Here as well. Here as well. Check, check, bet. Here there's also an overfold. Here, 63% is probably about standard. Bad check bet stands out here with two sizings, a third of the pot and half the pot. So roughly this range and an overbet. If you look at the middle part of the range, Queen 4, the queen got there. In fact, you can go for a check raise. King Queen, the queen got there, you can go for a check raise. Since there is a deuce in the range, which got there on the big blind, most likely this is against the big blind. Yeah, this is blind versus blind. In blind versus blind, ace deuce checks. King deuce, if it opens, also checks. And ace deuce offsuit as well. If it opens, it also checks, so they are played as check call. But with this sizing overall, well, it's not solver approved, so to speak. With a size like this, two checks and on the queen here, it's probably a check raise, check push. Well, a check raise could probably be made. Well, how should I put it? Knowing the cards, of course, I wouldn't do that. But here there could be a situation where the opponent won't always bet for value. Two flush draws missed. So this could be a sizing aimed at pushing out the opponent's middle range. That is, the middle range would be weak nines, some 3 times hands, small pocket pairs, something like that. Well, check call, okay. So the check raise button isn't really popular here overall. When we take a much closer look at the specific raises made in position, it becomes quite clear that along this particular bet check line, the vast majority of the raises we are seeing here are primarily for value. However, we can also observe that some of the middle range hands are already starting to turn into bluffs, specifically with pocket sixes. It's just interesting to watch. Furthermore, having a 10 in this particular spot serves as a solid semi-bluff for value, specifically with a hand like Queen 10. Excellent. 10.3 is unclear. Maybe there's some fish sitting there with a short stack. The third raise, well, overall, yes. It's a good raise to raise here with second pair after 2 checks. That's quite good. Further increases are also mostly for value along the check call hold line. That is when we've played check check on the flop, called the turn, and then raise on the river. And here, overall, yes, that's basically what I'm talking about. So when we play call, well, actually no, here there is both a call and a raise. And maybe it even makes sense since straights and full houses with an 8 are blocked like Jack 8 and pocket 8s. So it probably makes sense to raise here. And moving on, here too the main value is the same. If you look at the situation out of position, that is when the open raiser is out of position, then... Alright then, so what exactly do we have going on here? These are folds against overbets, meaning check folds as I understand it, yes. Check folds on the river, a 30% bet on the flop. So a small bet on the flop and a fold on the river. In other words, check fold. And here too you can see that absolutely all the values are overestimated. River calls are mostly made as bluff catchers, and again, river raises are the same way. For some reason the same range is shown. Some kind of error in the pop-up. Next bet, check call, check fold. Here we have the value for low bets. For a small bet, for an overbet, check bet 70, check fold to an overbet. Well, these numbers are really hard to remember, so here everything will probably be very situational depending on our opponent. At the same time, again, if we play the check flop line, we definitely need to have bets with a weak range, because the opponent in position will often be capped. The bet line out of position is very important here. It's not used enough, well, its frequency is lacking. And here, this is because many people try to set traps and play with a check raise. But remember this, people really underbluff, so our traps won't work here. So here, for example, a river check with a strong range, ace-king, let's say. The straight got there, but we're not ready to play, let's say, a situation against the button. Against the button, in general, it's probably better to play either check raise or check call because his range will bet here very often. But if we chose to bet, okay, on the turn the nuts have changed a lot, so now we can play a check, in my opinion. And on the river the straight got there, but there are almost no sets, meaning there are very few of them. The only combination is 9 to 10, 8 to 9. Jack 9, King 9 are very rarely called there. Nines themselves could show up, of course, but it's doubtful. So if we check here, we don't want to play check call. We want to get some more value from a king, maybe king jack, or rather king queen as an option, or queen jack or queen 10. So there are combinations that will call. Ace jack might call sometimes too. So overall, it's a thin value bet, but it exists. You need to find those as well. Next we have the deviation line, which is check bet bet, but here 4% is not that critical. So I wouldn't consider 4% to be some kind of major deviation. Check, check, bet. Here again, you can see that it's a very weak range with medium strength hands that can be raised on the river. And check, call, check, bet. Here overall it's size dependent. The higher the size, the stronger the range. For some reason, the bluffing frequency stays more or less the same. That is, no one is widening their bluffing range for larger bet sizes. And again, let me remind you, this is a database of players from no limit 1000 to no limit 5000 limits. So these are people who play quite well, they understand the game, but there are still some gaps, so to speak. By no means am I teaching or coaching anyone. This is all done personally for myself, and my opinion is subjective. Next we have check on the flop, bet 30, check fold. Here again we can see inflated values, meaning that after a bet of 3 on the turn and a check, there will very often be folds. So in fact we can just keep firing and we'll make extra value from folds. Next we have the line, check call, check fold. More precisely, check, check call, check fold. Here we also see deviations, but they're not as significant, about 4%. But with a small sizing, it's already 12%, meaning people fold 12% more than they should if we bet a third on the river. Here, for example, it's even 17%, and here it's 12%. So if we just take one universal sizing, I would probably choose a third, because in all situations where the opponent plays out of position with check call or check on the flop and bet on the turn, they will very often fold to a third on the river. If I get called here, it's not a big deal. I know that over the long run, this will be quite profitable. The main thing I want to highlight here is that on the river, lines are very often capped. A capped line is one where there has been at least one check, and we can play aggressively with a raise if the opponent is in position. If the opponent is out of position and chooses a passive line starting with a check, then in fact we can play by betting a third of the pot on the river, and that will be enough. I think that's all for now. This turned out to be a short video. Thank you all, goodbye, and good luck.